I would like to thank the AIAA and Chairperson John Robinson from the Boeing Company, James Kennedy, the Director of NASA, and Bryce Gasenti with Pratt & Whitney for this opportunity to present my concept for the cosmic matrix displacement model. The future of space exploration was reinvigorated in January when President Bush outlined his new space initiative for going back to the moon and beyond. Defining how to effectively and affordably meet the goals of going beyond Earth orbit has become a hot topic. My matrix concept will hopefully heat up the aerospace industry and allow us to bring the future of space exploration closer to the present. It normally takes me 2 hours to explain the displacement model for gravity and inertia. My 25-minute condensed version moves pretty fast, so I hope you all can keep up with me. Results from empirical evidence related to electromagnetism and the transference of magnetic induction in some ferrous metals in magnetic fields, combined with the precepts of the space-time quantum vacuum, were used to develop a concept for gravity and inertia. The new theory, based upon Einstein's efforts to integrate light and gravity, develops primary attributes for the fundamental physics of space, time, forces, and energy exchange. The conceptual quantum model shows that it is necessary to reinterpret the relationship between electromagnetism and inertia and gravitation. This includes the correlation between the strong force, the electroweak force, and gravity. The energy exchange attributes of the relativistic space-time explains the wave-particle duality of light and the properties of the quantum vacuum that we call cosmic matrix.
The objective of the present work is to demonstrate a correlation between the electromagnetic force and the energy exchange attributes of the quantum vacuum. The purpose of this work is to unify electromagnetism and gravitation in an attempt to unite all forces in the context of the quantum gauge field theory. The cosmic matrix displacement model, or CMD model, is one possible explanation for the quantum vacuum and its energy exchange attributes. But the CMD model is the only concept that not only provides an explanation for gravity and inertia, it also provides an experiment to construct an artificial gravity generator, or AGG. The experiment will, without a doubt, prove that my concept is valid, or prove that the CMD model does not define the properties of the quantum vacuum. The small artificial gravity generator prototype shown here has been designed with a super-dense spinning disk, suspended by powerful magnetic bearings and linear accelerators to increase its angular momentum, all of which are encased in a structural vacuum chamber. If the prototype artificial gravity generator is successful, 4 AGGs would be mounted in a structural frame, with gimbals on each AGG for directional stability. By locating very dense weights above the AGGs that slide in and out of the gravity vector lines of force, it will be possible to move the vehicle in any direction in Earth's gravitational field or any coordinate location in outer space. Place a control compartment over the top of the structure and a landing gear equipment pod on the underside of the structure. Tilt the AGG pods and move the weights into the gravity vector lines of force and fly into orbit at any appropriate velocity. Now the difficult task is to define gravity and inertia and explain how they are related to the strong nuclear force and the electroweak force in the 20 minutes remaining. The fundamental assumptions of the cosmic matrix displacement model is that the space-time quantum vacuum, or Einstein's cosmological constant, commonly known as empty space, has specific attributes that generate the 3 variations of one force in the universe that we call quantum displacement gravity. The 3 variations of displacement gravity that account for all interactions in the universe are the strong displacement gravity force, the electroweak displacement gravity force, and gravity fields. To explain the 3 force variations, it is necessary to give you a brief overview of the cosmic matrix displacement model, or CMD model, and the most appropriate example is to demonstrate how a hydrogen atom was formed during the initial expansion of the universe. Remember, no one will ever see the actual image of the subatomic world or go back to the beginning of the universe. But if we can build an artificial gravity generator using the CMD model attributes, maybe the assumptions of the CMD are correct. At the end of my presentation, I will outline the requirements for a gravity generator experiment. To digress here for a moment, Stephen Hawking stated, Einstein was wrong when he said God does not play dice. Consideration of black holes suggests not only does God play dice, but that he sometimes confuses us by throwing them where they can't be seen. The cosmic matrix displacement model asserts that the basic energy exchange entities formed from the cosmic matrix substance that existed prior to the universe creation. The attributes of the pre-universe matrix were non-compressibility, perfect uniformity, and zero friction if motion occurred. Many contemporary theorists believe that the superstring theory may resolve all of the open problems of the standard model. The string theory embodies a very high degree of symmetry and generalizes both the symmetry of the standard model and the general coordinate invariance of general relativity. According to the string theory and its successor, the M theory and others, the fundamental building blocks of nature are not point-like elementary particles, but tiny one-dimensional vibrating strings. The cosmic matrix displacement model expands upon the string theory and asserts that the one-dimensional vibrating strings are actually four-dimensional vortispheres that statically fill the universe and transfer 100% of their motion energy as they rebound off of each other. The CMD model asserts that the pre-universe matrix was void of all matter and all motion, and void of time. I would like to comment here that the matrix concept is based upon speculation, but all new concepts must start somewhere. When motion did occur in the space-time quantum vacuum, vortispheres formed from the matrix substance with a shear sphere boundary layer between the still matrix and the moving vortispheres. The vortispheres continued to form and expand exponentially out through the new universe, and were rebounding off of each other, transferring 100% of their motion energy to the next vortisphere upon impact, with zero friction loss. With VS1 motion, time began as we know it. The minute length of time it takes a vortisphere to move across the matrix gap and impact the next vortisphere establishes the average speed of light at 299,793,458 meters per second. As the vortispheres expanded into the new universe, they created an enormous inward pressure on the initial core of vortispheres. The pressure then collapsed the core vortispheres into vortisphere 2s or VS2s with twice the volume of vortisphere 1s or VS1s. The newly formed space between the VS2s caused the surrounding VS1s to slam the core VS2s inward to impact at the center and instantly rebound out into the new universe through the vortisphere 1 matrix at significantly less than the speed of light. The expanding mass of VS2s sustained their motion velocity by inertia. That is a direct result of displacement gravity. You can see in this simplified animation that VS1s in front of the moving VS2 must move out of the way in front, resulting in more VS1s rebounding in the rear of the VS2, and produces sustained VS2 velocity until it impacts another VS2. A VS2 displaces VS1s as it moves through the cosmic matrix, and results in more VS1s rebounding off the surface of the VS2 sphere than rebounding without the VS2 displacement. When two VS2s approach each other, there are less VS1s between the VS2s than around them. The two VS2s are pushed or moved towards each other. Displacement of VS1s is the basic principle of gravity for all matter in the universe. The cosmic matrix displacement model, or CMD model, asserts that the most efficient VS2 cluster arrangement consists of 6 VS2s around 1 VS2 at the center and 3 VS2s on each side, known as an icosahedron nucleated. The CMD model calls this VS2 cluster a QUON, Q-U-O-N. To explain the relationship between the atom and the QUON, we can take a quick hypothetical journey into a balloon filled with hydrogen gas atoms and magnify our view so that we can see the electron clouds of the hydrogen atoms zipping around each other. Magnifying our view of one hydrogen atom on in past the electron cloud 100,000 times smaller to the proton, on through the proton cloud, down to the 3-quark cluster, and on down through 1 quark cloud to the extremely small QUON structure that, according to the CMD model, generates the quark cloud. One way to create a visual image of the displacement concept for gravity is to think of the VS1 matrix as a bucket of BBs, and the VS2 as a golf ball. If you push the golf ball into the bucket of BBs, you displace BBs. Obviously, if you drill holes into the golf ball, you would displace less BBs. In other words, the less atomic mass, or VS2s, displacing the cosmic matrix, the less gravitational force is exerted against the mass by displacement. Atomic mass displaces VS1s and sets up vector lines of force in the VS1s, meaning that there are more VS1s rebounding off of each other along the vector lines than they would if rebounding randomly without atomic matter present. What follows is a very important attribute of our early universe and quark formation into protons and neutrons. The QUON clusters are rotating at very high velocities because of conservation of angular momentum. As a QUON rotates and moves through the rebounding VS1s, it generates waves. The VS1s are rebounding off of the outer VS2 spheres, generating a displacement wave. A second displacement wave is generated from each of 6 inner VS2 spheres on each side of the QUON. But the inner displacement waves are generated by VS2s rotating slower than the outer VS2s. The inner displacement waves, therefore, have a steeper angle than the displacement waves generated by the faster-moving outer VS2 spheres. The steeper angle displacement waves cross the lower angle displacement waves somewhere out in the VS1s away from the QUON cluster and generate an interference wavepoint that continuously regenerates around each QUON. This is the quark cloud. It has been determined that there are 6 different types of quarks: the up quark, the down quark, charm, strange, top and bottom quarks. I will only use the up and down quarks as examples because the CMD model shows that the other 4 quarks are short-lived, high-energy variations of the up and down quark. When the new universe had cooled sufficiently, 3 quarks were able to cluster by displacement of VS1s. In other words, there were more VS1s rebounding on the outside of the quark clusters than between them. The surrounding VS1s' rebounding energy forces the quarks together. 3 quarks, it turns out, is a very stable arrangement. Each quark in the cluster generates gravity interference waves in the VS1s as it revolves around the other 2 quarks that result in the 3 forces that hold the quarks together. They are the inward displacement force, the outward displacement force, and inertia. The inward force is generated by the 3 rotating quarks that displace the surrounding VS1s. The result is that more VS1s are rebounding on the outside of the quarks than on the inside. The displaced VS1s set up vector lines of force. There are more VS1s rebounding along the vector lines than there are rebounding randomly in their normal state before displacement. The outward force is generated by each quark in the cluster. As the quarks rotate, they generate gravity displacement waves in the surrounding VS1s. When the waves of 2 quark clouds intersect, they form interference wavepoints that move toward the other quark in the cluster. Each pair of quarks' interference wavepoints move the other quark away. This outward force holds the 3 quark clouds apart. The inward and outward forces create a very stable cluster. If you add up the weight of the up quarks, the down quarks, and the electrons that make up a 150-pound individual, it would come to around 3 pounds. What accounts for the rest of the weight? The quarks are moving around so fast that they give us weight. As Einstein pointed out in E equals mc squared, energy is equivalent to mass. About half of our mass comes from the motion of quarks, and about half from the gravity displacement waves that hold the quarks together and apart in the proton. 15 tons of force hold two adjacent quarks together and apart in the quark cluster. Now that we have a stable quark cluster, I can show how the electron cloud of the hydrogen atom is generated according to the CMD model. I know that the electron has always been thought of as both particle and wave. This duality has created many mathematical and theoretical dilemmas for scientists. But the CMD model for the electron may, if test data confirms, simplify the understanding of what generates an electron and how electrons do what they do so dramatically. The CMD model for the electron may shed new light on the origin of the various orbitals for the hydrogen atom energy levels, as well as a possible solution for the wave-particle duality of light. When three quarks revolve around each other, they form two displacement gravity waves. Only one down quark generates two waves in the surrounding VS1s because the other two up quarks are revolving too close to the x-axis and therefore cannot manage to impact VS1s in the surrounding matrix. As they rotate, one wave is generated by the interference wave points that create the quark cloud. The second wave is generated by the quant at the center of the quark. The first wave has a lower angle because the quark cloud has a larger diameter than the small quant at the center and is therefore rotating faster than the quant. Faster rotation equals a lower angle wave. Where the high angle overtakes the low angle wave, somewhere away from the quark cluster, they produce interference wave points that form a sphere around the quark cluster. This continuously regenerated sphere is the electron cloud of the hydrogen atom. The more energy absorbed by the quark cluster, the larger the electron cloud orbit generated by the down quark, until the two up quarks are forced into larger orbits around the x-axis and begin to generate their own displacement gravity waves. The CMD model asserts that the only difference between up and down quarks is their relative orbital distance from the x-axis of the quark cluster. The CMD model also provides some tantalizing potential solutions to current problems with the standard model, such as why a neutron changes into a proton when free of the nucleus, and how a neutron is formed from protons in star cores. There are a few hard-to-believe implications, such as how to build a matter disintegrator by nullifying the gravity waves generated by quark clusters, or how a black hole generates plasma jets from the poles, and lastly, a possible way to allow matter to accelerate faster than light. The first diagram shows a large mass of atomic matter displacing more VS1s than the small atomic mass. There are more VS1s rebounding along the hypothetical vector lines than VS1s rebounding randomly without atomic mass present. The larger the mass, the greater the displacement of VS1s. The closer the small mass gets to the large mass, the more VS1s are rebounding along the vector lines of force. In other words, the basis for the inverse square law. The second diagram enlarges the small atomic mass and shows the vector lines of force that originate at the center of the large atomic mass. You can see that there are less VS1s rebounding on the inside of the small mass, facing the large mass, than on the outside of the small mass. This unbalanced force moves the small mass towards the large mass at the inverse square of the distance. This is the basic concept for gravity and how it works for all quarks, atoms, planets, stars, galaxies, black holes in our universe. The cosmic matrix displacement model asserts that there are underlying determinants for magnetism that reveals the properties of the quantum vacuum that generate pulse gravity fields in the VS1s. If we could see the body-centered or face-centered cubic lattice of iron atoms, in a permanent magnet, we would find that each atom is oscillating in unison. The reason for the oscillation in this magnet is a nickel atom at the center position of the lattice. The nickel atom is slightly heavier than the iron atom and acts like a pendulum by adding a minute amount of energy to the lattice on each oscillation. This diagram shows that the in-line oscillating iron atoms generate a positive gravity displacement wave to the right, or the plus end, as it impacts VS1s in the surrounding matrix, and a gravity displacement wave to the left, or the minus end of the magnet. Both waves are generated by the VS1s surrounding all nuclei in the iron atoms of the magnet by moving quants at the center of each quark. Only quants and interference wave points, generated by two waves crossing, can move VS1s in the cosmic matrix quantum vacuum. Every iron atom in the magnet generates a gravity displacement wave on each oscillation out the right end and the left end of the magnet. As the millions and millions of waves move out of the magnet, they cross each other and form millions and millions of interference wave points along each gravity displacement wave. The cosmic matrix displacement model asserts that there are two variations of gravity. Type 1 is fixed displacement gravity generated by the planets, stars, and galaxies, etc. The enormous mass of atoms concentrated in one place displaces the VS1s of the matrix that fill the universe and is surrounding and through all atomic matter. Any matter that is in the vector lines of force is pushed towards the center of the larger mass, such as the center of the Earth. Type 2 displacement gravity is pulse wave gravity. This type of gravity is generated by quants at the center of quarks and oscillating atoms in magnets. Electromagnetic waves, or light waves, are generated by any motion in the VS1s of the cosmic matrix. VS1s transfer 100% of their motion energy from VS1 to VS1 in a spherical wave shape, or in segments of VS1 waves like neutrinos, free electrons, neutropions, positrons, etc., all of which I don't have time to elaborate on here. This diagram shows a magnet generating pulse gravity waves out the south pole and the north pole of the magnet. A round steel ball is located in the vector lines of force generated by rebounding VS1s of the cosmic matrix. When the magnet interference wave points pass through the steel ball, they move the quants at the center of each quark in the proton of the iron atom nuclei in phase with the magnet iron atoms. As each wave passes through the ball, there are more VS1s impacting on the back of the ball atom quants than on the front facing the magnet. Each time the waves from the magnet pass through the steel ball atoms, the ball is moved towards the magnet. Each time the waves from the steel ball pass through the magnet atoms are moved towards the steel ball. This process is repeated each time the pulse gravity waves pass through the ball or the magnet, until the ball touches the magnet. When you take the steel ball away from the magnet, the ball atoms stop oscillating and no longer produce pulse gravity waves. The ball is no longer magnetized. Now that the cosmic matrix displacement model has demonstrated a possible causality for gravity, we are able to propose an experiment for artificial gravity using the precepts of the strong displacement gravity force. The CMD model asserts that if a small superdense spinning disk is spun with angular momentum sufficient to displace VS1s, or vortisphere 1s, of the quantum vacuum, it may be possible to generate an artificial gravity field above the spinning disk. The CMD model for artificial gravity is called SCAPE, SCAPE. The letters stand for space curviform amplification by particle exoration. Exoration is the act of plowing. This diagram is the key to designing an artificial gravity generator prototype. It shows a rapidly spinning disk of atoms that is displacing VS1s in the cosmic matrix. When VS1s are displaced, there are vector lines of force that form around the disk. The intensity of the vector lines of force depends upon the velocity, density, and distribution of atoms inside the rotating disk. In this diagram, there is more atom mass in the rim of the disk that is revolving at the highest velocity, and as a result creates very strong vector lines of force in the VS1s. That is to say, there are more VS1s rebounding along the vector lines than rebounding randomly. Any atom object located in the curved region of cosmic matrix will be moved in the direction of the curvature, or towards the focal point of the vector lines of force, as an example, the center of the Earth. The inward gravity field is located around the rim of the disk, and I've discovered that as the disk is spun up in RPM, the inward gravity field gets stronger and stronger and gradually overcomes the centrifugal force of the spinning disk. Surprisingly, the increasing inward gravitational force may allow the velocity of the disk to be increased. In the top center region of the spinning disk, there is an area that is labeled lifting area of the disk. You can see that the vector lines of force shown as arrows start to point out from the surface of the disk. This area is where the transition takes place from inward gravity force on the rim of the disk to outward gravity force in the dished area of the disk. The center of the disk is spinning more slowly than the outer rim, but still displaces VS1s. The vector lines of force are concave like the inner surface of a sphere, and this generates VS1 forces that move any atom mass outward from the disk, thereby creating artificial gravity that not only nullifies the Earth gravity, but also creates an outward gravitational force by positioning a heavy mass of atoms above the spinning disk, outside the vacuum chamber, and attached to the chamber. The atom mass will fall up in the negative gravity field, lifting the vacuum chamber upward and away from the Earth's surface. I agree completely with this final quote from Einstein that states, "I have deep faith that the principle of the universe will be beautiful and simple." In closing, I would like to say the cosmic matrix displacement model asserts that displacement gravity is the only force in the universe.
It does not matter whether my concept for gravity is proven right or wrong. What matters is that I impress upon you one final thought. It is imperative that we thoroughly explore the potential of artificial gravity as vigorously as we did for the Manhattan Project, because if we don't, some other wannabe superpower or radical group will, and they will have the same advantage over us that we had over the Axis powers that led to their unconditional surrender. I pray that our failure to quickly develop a successful artificial gravity program does not someday result in our unconditional surrender. Thank you very much.